Sure. Hi, Yolanda, and thanks for having me. I've been at WHO for 9 years, and we're now going through a very large reform process for the emergency program that includes 9 areas of work. And I was asked to help on the area of work that deals with detection to grading, which includes the risk assessment process. So I led a group that included WHO HQ colleagues as well as regional office colleagues. All the regions were involved to try to come up with a single process, a standard process for the risk assessment stage of emergency work. Sure. So what we're proposing is a single system that would apply to any hazard, so an event from any hazard. So that would include conflict, it could include natural disasters, food safety incidents, chemical, radionuclear, and communicable disease hazards. So we wanted to try to get a standard approach that could apply to all hazards and have recognizable deliverables from the risk assessment so that the organization as a whole would recognize, oh, there's WHO's risk assessment, oh, there's the summary document of the risk assessment, etc. So we started with the verification of events. So we get event notifications in from many different sources, from country level, from CNN, from all sorts of formal and informal channels. And that goes through a verification process to make sure, usually through the member state, to make sure the event is real, that it happened. And then we would move to a risk assessment. And this was the component that we wanted to really get aligned across the organization and across all hazards as we come together into a single emergency program. So we've developed a document that shows a sort of step-by-step process. But the idea would be, as soon as the event is verified, a group is formed, a risk assessment group for that event is formed, and it would be made up of individuals from the emergency program. Could partners might also be involved. Certainly member state colleagues would be involved, and usually a hazards specialist. So someone who knows the specific disease or who is very familiar with conflict or specific natural disasters, flood versus earthquake, etc. So we'd have a small team that's put together, and a head would be determined who would lead that group. And then they would sit together for preparatory work to decide, okay, with this hazard that we're facing, what are the main risks we're looking at? And what are the questions, the risk questions, the top risk questions for this event that we need to look at? So the group together would decide quite quickly in a meeting, what are the main risks we want to look at here? And then the risk assessment would be conducted quite rapidly. It's just an initial assessment to get a feel for what's happening in the event. And the questions then would involve issues related to the hazard itself, issues related to the exposure. Is it a populated area or not, etc.? How widely have people been exposed? How many people have been affected? And then the context, which would, of course, include the capacity of the health system to handle the health consequences of the event, etc. So looking at those three main areas, the hazard, the exposure, and the context, the team would then look at the different risk questions that they built, hazard-specific risk questions, and determine ultimately what we were aiming for is a score for each question that links the likelihood and the impact of each of those to measure risk, and a confidence level for each of those scores, how much confidence we have in the information available to us. And ultimately then looking at all those risk questions and the answers that come up to give a risk score to the overall event, to say if it's a low, medium, or high risk, the event. And of course, this is event specific because the questions are always event specific. And then the idea is there's a single standard template to submit the results from the risk assessment, and that there's a very short 2-page summary of the scores of the risk assessment that explain how the overall risk score is determined. And then from there, a medium and high risk score would lead to WHO's grading process. A low risk score would say no grading, no emergency response may be required at this time, we can handle these risks with our regular capacities, the country office, etc. So well, the first two steps in the process are what trigger it for us. The detection of the event, that very often comes directly from the country, and then the verification, which is through colleagues in the Ministry of Health to verify the event. So as soon as that's happened, our view is we should move right to risk assessment, even a very rapid risk assessment to see the risks of this specific event. So that would trigger this process immediately. And of course, WHO stands ready in any situation to support the member state to take this forward, and are ready to send in the team, technical experts, or simply help and advise on the process. That's a really good question, because the emergency reforms haven't completely determined that yet. There's still discussion on which levels of the organization are responsible for which aspects. The proposal that was put forward by our team on this reform subject was that there should be a global team consisting of headquarters and regional colleagues, that they work as a single team, even though they're in different geographical locations. They're a single team that moves forward on these issues. So the members of any event-specific risk assessment team might be from any of the regions or any of the various areas of HQ as well. Absolutely. It should be, for us, any verified event should have some kind of rapid risk assessment with event-specific risk questions that can quickly determine if there is a real risk of this spreading and becoming a very large event, or with huge health consequences, or if it's will be very easily contained and won't actually ever become an emergency. It's something that can be handled in with our regular resources at the country office normally. Yeah. So this risk assessment should be able to help answer those questions. This is the hope is that what we get out of this risk assessment, this rapid assessment right after verification, would be able to determine our next steps. Well, there's a new emergency program. This is the new program that's being set up, and within that program, there's one area of work called risk assessment and health information management, and that would be the team that is assumed to be leading on this work within WHO. For the moment, different departments in different program areas of WHO do their own individual assessments. And I think the idea with the new emergency program is that we'd have a much more standardized approach, a more harmonized approach, so that by event a team would be formed, a multifaceted team would be formed. Whereas now each program area does its own risk assessment with its own methodology, with its own type of information sharing approach. And one of the big bonuses of this new approach, we hope, is that it pulls all the hazards into a single approach toward risk assessment. The only thing I'd say is one of the big lessons learned we had was that risk assessments often tend to focus on the risk of the specific event or the specific hazard, and we have to always remember to look at the risks to health across the board. We have to look at if we focus only on preventing and controlling the specific hazard, big risks open up in health service delivery in general, perhaps. There can be consequences to focusing our efforts in one area or another. So as we move along, risk assessment is an iterative process. It's throughout the response. We're continually reassessing and re-looking and seeing if the questions still apply, or if we need new questions. And we have to always remember to look at other aspects of health service delivery, other health consequences of the event that might not be directly related to the hazard, the first hazard or the first risk. So I think it's keeping a broad view of what's happening during the event to see if you really got the right risk question. Sometimes risks pop up that you're not focused on because you're looking at event-specific risks. So I think that's one of our big lessons learned. Indeed, yeah, it's come up continually that because the focus was on getting rid of Ebola, and because of the fears in the community, et cetera, there weren't other health services weren't able to be delivered at that time. So people were getting ill or dying from other illnesses other than Ebola that might have been or probably would have been caught and treated if there had been a functioning health system at the same time.